Nikki Haley has called for politicians over 75 years old to, oh yes, to be required to take a mental health competency test. I wonder who that's aimed at. Both of them, right?
I think it's both. I think she's trolling. It allows her to draw attention to Biden. She's in a Republican primary, but it's a subtle hit on Trump. They're both older politicians. They have every right to run. The competency test is a really long campaign, and people will assess how they seem.
But shouldn't we do that for everybody? Why just over 75? Because, I mean, over here, my 35-year-old
the House of Representatives.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's only one age requirement. The Constitution has a minimum age, and that was because they were so worried about people passing things on to their famous sons at the time. There's no maximum age, but we have that for pilots and other things. But again, I think it's hard. If you've covered these things, you know how it is. It's hard to run for president. We're going to see how they do. And then you're going to decide at the debates and other forums whether they seem like they got it.
The stage was primed for a no-holds-barred debate as Bill Maher opened real time with his signature bite, tearing into Nikki Haley's audacious proposal for mental competency tests targeting politicians over 75. Smirking, he skewered the absurdity of demanding that leaders entrusted with the fate of nations prove they can navigate a Sudoku puzzle before wielding power, earning roaring laughter from the crowd. Turning to Christoph Waltz, Maher cut through the political theater, asking bluntly whether Haley's gambit was a legitimate safeguard or a thinly veiled shot at Biden and Trump. Christoph Waltz, razor-sharp as ever, dissected the maneuver as a calculated strike, cynically cloaked as reform, designed to undermine the aging frontrunners while stoking calls for generational turnover. Together, they wrestled with the provocative question, should decades of political clout excuse cognitive slips, or is it a dangerous gamble? And ultimately, they didn't let voters off the hook, probing why the electorate keeps entrusting the highest office to candidates well past their prime. The exchange crackled with sharp humor and pointed critique, setting the stage for an unflinching exploration of age, power, and accountability in American politics.
Well, and as Don Lemon told us on CNN, women actually can't run for president because he said we're past our prime once we get to our 40s. But since you have to be 35 to run, it's like this really tight window between 35 and 40.
But it presupposes that's the only way you can be mentally incompetent. I mean, I would take a guy who's 90 and forgets a few things, but he's seen a lot in his life and has the experience. And of course, if you have Alzheimer's and you're not there and you don't remember who your wife is, obviously that's a different story. But as opposed to somebody who's 40 and doesn't have a lot of experience, and yeah,
I think you're right. What's funny is I think ageism is real. We see it in a lot of industries.
Oh.
And we see it on a sexist basis as well, as I think you mentioned, which is fair. I just think that what's funny is the one place that you see less ageism in our public life would be politics. When you look at Pelosi, McConnell, the current president, the last president who's running for re-election. So while I do think it's a problem, I think we should be less ageist. We were talking about civil rights earlier. That's one of the things people discriminate on. Having said that, for whatever reason, incumbency, fame, other things, donor class.
And the voters are older.
The voters keep going back to some of the choices that are upper in the age bracket.
There's a movement in Europe going on right now, started by an older gentleman who had to deal with his bank. And the movement's called I'm Old, Not Stupid.
All right, let's talk about Nikki Haley's whole mental competency test for politicians over 75 idea, because honestly, it's giving me mixed vibes. On the surface, yeah, it sounds kinda logical. I mean, we make pilots and surgeons prove they're sharp enough to do their jobs. Why should politicians who literally control the economy, national security, and our rights get a free pass? Seems fair, right? But here's where it gets tricky. This could easily slide into straight-up age discrimination. You're telling me someone with 40 years of experience should be sidelined just because they hit a certain number? That's wild. Plus, let's be real. There are plenty of younger politicians out there who don't have a clue what they're doing. Age isn't always the problem. What this really comes down to isn't age, it's trust. Voters already judge a candidate's mental fitness every time they step on a debate stage or do an interview. Slapping a mandatory test on older leaders feels like saying, hey, we don't trust you to make that call. And honestly, that's a slippery slope. Oh, instead of obsessing over birth dates, how about we hold all politicians accountable, regardless of how many candles are on their birthday cake?
New census data shows that California and New York saw a mass exodus, well, mass, I don't know, 500,000, wow, of people, with their populations dropping by around 500,000 people. And it doesn't say over, is that in a year? Maybe it is, or the last couple of years. Can anything bring cost of living down in desirable places? Oh, I must have
Texas,
heard our discussion.
Florida, Tennessee, no state income tax.
Right.
Nice weather. And something else.
Well,
something else about those states.
Is this a referendum on the way we govern here in California and New York? I mean, obviously, looks like a blue state, red state thing.
I mean, a lot of it is big offices in big cities. Like, I live in Brooklyn. A lot of those big Manhattan towers haven't filled back up with people, but also that was an urban plan built a long time ago, and maybe it's evolving. I totally get it. I mean, in all fairness, I think it's fine if people don't want to be in these super expensive cities and go somewhere else, especially if they don't have to commute to one of those skyscrapers that often, then fine. But I think in New York, like, from what we can see anecdotally, I don't think all those buildings are going to fill back up.
Let's talk about this big migration trend everyone's buzzing about. People packing up and leaving blue states like California and New York, heading straight for red-leaning, low-tax states like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee. On the surface, it's pretty clear what's driving it. People are fed up. High taxes, insane housing prices, overregulation, and policies that feel more restrictive than protective. It's no wonder a lot of folks are saying, you know what? I'm out. It's almost like an unofficial referendum on how these blue states are being run. Critics of New York and California will tell you this is a wake-up call. The crime, the crumbling infrastructure, the endless costs, they're not sustainable. Add in pandemic policies that made remote work the norm, and suddenly, being tied to a pricey urban hub just doesn't make sense. But here's the flip side. Defenders of blue state policies aren't exactly wrong when they argue there's more to the story. These states offer cultural capital, career opportunities, diversity, stuff that doesn't always show up in migration stats. Plus, while red states might tout their lower taxes, the question hanging in the air is whether they can keep up infrastructure and public services without the big revenue streams. From where I'm sitting, though, this mass exodus feels like more than a short-term trend. It looks like Americans are starting to prioritize cost of living, governance, and personal freedom over old-school loyalty to coastal cities. So the real question becomes, is this just people reacting to immediate frustrations, or are we witnessing a deeper shift, a full-on cultural and economic realignment in the U.S.?
They're not. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the good things that happened with the pandemic was when time stopped, we got a chance to sort of like reassess. And we were saying to ourselves, why do we need to go to work 5 days? And we don't. Not from, you probably should work 5 days, but maybe you could get your work done in 4 days. They found when people work 80% of the time, if they get paid the same, they do the same amount of work. Because most people, in an 8-hour day, they work 3 hours. So why not? And, save all that commuter time. We come to the office once a week now. Well, obviously today to do the show. But other than, yeah, you're welcome. It was a pleasure. But other than that, once a week. And I feel that's perfect. We could do the rest of it at home. I don't need to see my lovely staff. I love them, but like once a week is perfect.
Here's the problem.
The remote work revolution, sparked by the pandemic, has completely reshaped how we think about the workplace, and honestly, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, there's a lot to celebrate. Remote work has given people the freedom to skip the daily commute, save serious cash, and reclaim some work-life balance, all while keeping productivity intact. Plenty of employees are saying, hey, I'm just as effective, maybe even more effective working from home. And for businesses, it's been a game changer, cutting overhead costs and tapping into talent from anywhere in the country or even the world. But, and here's where it gets interesting, it's not all upside, especially when you zoom in on the long-term effects, particularly for younger professionals just starting out. Without those face-to-face moments, the chance for real mentorship, networking, and learning by osmosis is taking a serious hit. How do you build skills, confidence, and relationships when your only interaction is through a screen? For hands-on professions, think law, medicine, engineering, that's a real problem. And let's not forget, those little water cooler chats, spontaneous brainstorms, office banter, they're not just fluff. They're part of the cultural glue that makes workplaces thrive. So, the big question, how do we find the balance between flexibility and growth, between efficiency and connection? That's it for today's deep dive. If this got you thinking, do me a favor, smash that like button, share this video with someone who's navigating remote work life, and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on more conversations like this. Your support keeps this channel going, and I'll see you in the next one.